Have you ever experienced a day that started so promising, only to take an unexpected turn? Jane Carter certainly did. It was a typical morning in Chicago when she raced through the crowded streets, late for work. But what was supposed to be just another frantic day quickly transformed into something extraordinary. A life was saved, a heroic act was performed, and yet the consequences were heartbreakingly unfair. From the rush of the city to the quiet hospital room, from a moment of triumph to the crushing reality of loss, Jane's story will take you on an emotional journey that ends with a spark of hope. Stay tuned to see how one woman's selfless act redefines her path in life. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Jane Carter emerged from the subway, her high heels echoing off the concrete as she dashed through the bustling streets of Chicago. The city pulsed around her, but all she could focus on was the rapid thumping of her heart. She was already running behind schedule. A knot tightened in her stomach as she imagined the stern look on Mr. Morgan's face. "He's going to be furious," she whispered to herself, weaving through the sea of people with a sense of urgency. As she neared the corner cafe, she hesitated, torn between the need for caffeine and the ticking clock that reminded her every second counted. Her empty stomach growled in protest, reminding her she hadn't eaten anything since last night. With a resigned sigh, Jane pushed through the cafe's door. "Morning, Linda," she called out breathlessly. "The usual, but make it fast, I'm running late." Linda, the kind, gray-haired barista, offered a warm smile. "Right away," dear Jane tapped her foot anxiously, her eyes glued to her watch, feeling the minutes slip away like sand through her fingers. When the coffee was finally in her hand, she hurried out, barely pausing to say, "Thanks." Linda, the hot cup radiated warmth through her fingers as she briskly walked down the crowded sidewalk, mentally rehearsing how she'd explain her tardiness. "Mr. Morgan, I sincerely apologize for being late," because she muttered, shaking her head in frustration. "No, that won't do. How about Mr. Morgan? I deeply regret." Her thoughts were abruptly interrupted by a man, perhaps in his mid-30s, who seemed out of place in his crisp business suit. He was leaning heavily against a building, his face ashen and eyes unfocused. Jane's steps faltered as concern gripped her. "Sir, are you all right?" she called out, her voice laced with worry. The man turned towards her, his expression dazed and confused. "I don't know. I feel strange." He mumbled before his eyes rolled back, and he began to collapse. Instinctively, Jane lunged forward, barely managing to catch him before he hit the pavement. "Someone help. Call an ambulance," she screamed, her voice trembling with panic. But the crowd around them seemed frozen, staring but not moving to assist. With shaking hands, Jane fumbled for her phone and dialed 911. 911. "What's your emergency?" the operator asked calmly. "There's a man here, he just collapsed on the street." "Please, send an ambulance quickly." Jane's voice was a mixture of fear and urgency. "Stay calm." "Where are you?" the operator asked, her voice steady. Jane looked around wildly. "We're at the corner of Michigan Avenue and 8th Street, right in front of Mike's Cafe. Help is on the way." "Is he breathing?" Jane leaned closer, her heart pounding in her chest. "Yes, but barely. It's shallow." "Good. Now check his pulse." Her fingers shook as she grasped the man's wrist, searching for a sign of life. "I think I feel it, but it's very faint." "You're doing great. Just stay with him. Help will be there soon." Jane tightened her grip on the man's hand, her voice barely a whisper as she pleaded, "Please hold on. Help is coming. Just hold on." The seconds dragged painfully, each one feeling like an eternity. The world around her faded away as she focused on the man's pale, lifeless face, silently praying for him to keep breathing. A small crowd gathered, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern, but none seemed to know him. Finally, the distant wail of sirens cut through the tension, growing louder as the ambulance approached. Relief washed over Jane as paramedics rushed to the scene, quickly taking charge. "What happened?" one of them asked, kneeling beside the man. "He just collapsed," Jane replied, her voice trembling. "His pulse is very weak." "You did everything right," the paramedic reassured her, nodding. "Jim, grab the defibrillator. This looks like a heart attack." They swiftly lifted the man onto a stretcher and into the waiting ambulance. One of the paramedics turned to Jane, his face serious but kind. "Are you a relative?" he asked. "No, just a passerby." "Can I come with you?" Jane asked, her voice filled with concern. The paramedics exchanged a glance, and then one of them nodded. "All right, get in. We might need more information at the hospital." Jane climbed into the ambulance, her heart racing as they sped towards the hospital. The man was immediately rushed into intensive care upon arrival. Jane found herself at the reception desk, filling out forms and clarifying that she wasn't a relative. "You're very kind to stay with him," a nurse remarked, her voice warm with appreciation. "Most people wouldn't have gone this far." Jane gave a modest shrug, feeling a bit embarrassed by the praise. "I couldn't just walk away and leave him there." Once the paperwork was done, Jane sank into a hard plastic chair in the hallway, exhaustion finally catching up with her. A glance at her watch made her stomach drop. She was 3 hours late for work. Panic surged through her as she weighed her options. Should she stay to learn the man's fate, or rush back to the office and hope her job wasn't on the line? Her thoughts were interrupted when a doctor emerged from the ICU, scanning the room. "Ms. Carter." "Yes, that's me," Jane said, springing to her feet. The doctor's serious expression softened into a smile. "He's stable now. It was a heart attack, but thanks to your swift action, he's going to pull through. You likely saved his life." Jane felt her knees buckle with relief. "Thank God," she whispered, her eyes welling up with tears. "We'll keep a close eye on him, but he's past the worst of it. Thank you for your help, Miss Carter. The world could use more people like you." Jane smiled faintly, brushing off the compliment. "I just did what anyone else would." The doctor shook his head, his expression turning solemn. "Not everyone would have, and that makes all the difference. You should feel proud." After leaving the hospital, Jane hailed a cab, knowing full well she didn't have enough money on her but was too drained to care. "Take me to the office, please," she told the driver, her mind already spinning with the story she'd have to tell Mr. Morgan. She knew his reputation all too well. His patience for tardiness was non-existent. As the cab pulled up to her office building, Jane took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. The familiar hustle and bustle of the office greeted her, but there was an unusual quiet as her colleagues glanced at her with wide eyes. "Jane, where have you been?" "Mr. Morgan is livid," his secretary, Lucy, hissed as Jane walked past her desk. "I'll explain everything," Jane muttered, bracing herself for what was to come as she made her way to his office. "Good luck," Lucy whispered as Jane took a deep breath and knocked on the door. "Mr. Morgan's gruff voice barked from inside, come in the moment she stepped into his office. The air crackled with tension. "Miss Carter, you're 3 hours late, Mr." Morgan erupted, his face flushed with anger. "Do you realize what you've done? You've jeopardized an important deal. Save your excuses, I don't want to hear them. You've let the entire team down. Pack your things, you're fired." The words hit Jane like a sledgehammer. Her heart plummeted, and a lump formed in her throat. "Please, Mr. Morgan, if you just listen for a moment, I saved a man's life today," she pleaded, her voice trembling with desperation. "Mr." Morgan's eyes narrowed, his expression filled with disbelief. "Really? And who exactly is this man?" he sneered, clearly not buying a word of it. Jane swallowed hard, trying to steady her shaking hands. She took a deep breath and began recounting the story: the stranger who collapsed, the frantic 911 call, the race to the hospital. She laid it all out, hoping against hope that he might understand. But when she finished, Mr. Morgan leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold. "Do you expect me to believe this absurd tale?" he asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. "I can show you the hospital paperwork," Jane insisted, her voice cracking with the weight of everything she was about to lose. "Mr. Morgan shook his head dismissively. "Even if what you say is true, it doesn't change the fact that you should have called. That's what we expect in this company: responsibility and reliability. This isn't about heroics, it's about your job performance. And based on that, you're not fit for this company. You're dismissed." Jane's vision blurred as tears welled up in her eyes. She fought to keep her voice steady. "Please, Mr. Morgan, give me another chance. I promise I'll work harder than ever before." But he had already turned his back on her, both literally and figuratively. "Goodbye, Miss Carter," he said, his tone final. Jane stumbled out of the office, the floor beneath her feeling as unstable as her emotions. The weight of what had just happened crashed over her, leaving her feeling shattered. Lucy looked up as Jane emerged, her face a picture of concern. The moment she saw the tears streaming down Jane's cheeks, she knew. "Oh, honey," she whispered, pulling Jane into a gentle hug. "He fired you, didn't he?" Jane nodded, unable to find her voice. The words stuck in her throat as she struggled to process the crushing reality of what had just transpired. "That old jerk," Lucy muttered under her breath. "Don't worry, Jane, you'll find something better. You're too good for this place anyway. Want me to talk to him? Maybe try to change his mind?" Jane gave a small, weary smile and shook her head. "No thanks, Lucy. We both know how stubborn he is. But I appreciate the offer. And thank you for being so kind." The two women embraced briefly, a silent exchange of understanding passing between them. Jane then returned to her desk, her heart heavy as she packed her belongings into a cardboard box. The office that had once been filled with her ambitions and daily routines now felt cold and unwelcoming. With one final glance around, she turned and walked out into the drizzling rain, the city seeming to echo her sense of loss. The raindrops tapped gently against her coat as she wandered down the sidewalk. Now what she murmured to herself, feeling utterly adrift. The thought of returning to her cramped apartment, with its pile of bills and empty refrigerator, filled her with dread. Without fully realizing it, her feet led her back to the hospital, the place where her day had taken such an unexpected turn. At the reception desk, Jane took a deep breath and approached the nurse on duty, a kind-looking middle-aged woman. "Hi, I brought in a patient this morning. I was wondering if I could check on him." The nurse looked up with a warm smile. "Of course, dear. What's his name?" "Carter." "Jane Carter," Jane replied. The nurse began typing on her computer, her expression shifting slightly as she found the information. "Ah, here it is. I'm afraid the news isn't great. He's still unconscious, and his condition is critical. The doctors are doing everything they can, but it's touch and go." Jane felt her heart drop. "Oh no," she whispered, a deep sense of worry settling in her chest. "But there's still hope, right? He could get better." The nurse's smile was gentle, though tinged with sadness. "There's always hope, sweetheart. We have some of the best doctors here. They won't give up on him." Jane nodded, trying to hold on to that thread of hope. "Has anyone contacted his family?" The nurse shook her head, her expression somber. "Unfortunately, we haven't been able to reach anyone. He had no ID on him, no phone, nothing. The police are looking into it, but so far, no luck." Jane felt a pang of sorrow for the stranger who had collapsed in front of her. "So he's all alone in there?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The nurse nodded. sympathy in her eyes. "Yes, I'm afraid so." Jane hesitated, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. But then she straightened up, a quiet resolve settling over her. "Would it be all right if I sat with him for a little while? I know it's not the usual protocol, but he shouldn't be alone." The nurse looked at Jane for a moment, weighing the request, before her expression softened. "Okay," she said gently, "but just for a little while. And if the doctors need to do anything, I'll have to ask you to step out." Jane nodded gratefully. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. She followed the nurse down the corridor, her heart heavy yet resolute. This man might be a stranger, but at that moment he wasn't alone because Jane was there, determined to offer whatever comfort she could. "Thank you so much," Jane whispered, her voice tinged with gratitude as the nurse nodded and left her alone in the quiet room. In room 305, Jane lingered by the door for a moment, taking in the sight of the man lying still and pale, connected to an array of beeping monitors. The harsh, sterile light cast deep shadows on his face, making him look even more fragile. Gathering her courage, she moved silently to his bedside and gently took his hand in hers. "Hi," she began softly, not knowing if he could hear her. "I'm the one who called the ambulance. You collapsed on the street, and I just couldn't walk away." She paused, searching his face for any flicker of recognition or movement, but there was nothing, just the steady rise and fall of his chest, kept alive by the machines around him. "Today has been overwhelming," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I lost my job because I was late. My boss didn't think saving a life was as important as meeting a deadline. Can you believe that?" Jane let out a heavy sigh, her frustration mingled with sadness. "But you know what? I don't regret it, not for a second. You're still here, and that's what matters." She squeezed his hand gently, her eyes welling up with unshed tears. "I believe you're going to pull through. There has to be someone out there who cares about you, someone who would be devastated to lose you. And if I could be a small part of keeping you here, that's enough for me." The room was filled with the quiet hum of machines and the distant sounds of the hospital. Jane sat in the silence, gathering her thoughts before speaking again. "I've always wanted to do something meaningful," she admitted. "Working as a secretary felt so empty, like I was just going through the motions every day. But today, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I did something worthwhile." She smiled, a bittersweet expression crossing her face. "Maybe this is a sign, a push to change my life. I've always thought about going into social work or maybe volunteering somewhere. My mom used to say that every challenge is an opportunity in disguise. Maybe losing my job is just the start of something new for me." Jane looked back at the man, his hand still warm in hers. "You've helped me more than you know. Maybe this meeting, as unexpected as it was, is going to change my life for the better." She spent the next hour talking softly, sharing bits of her life, her dreams, and the importance of helping others. She didn't know if her words were reaching him, but she hoped that somehow her presence brought a small measure of comfort to his unconscious mind. "My grandma used to say that kindness is a language the deaf can hear and the blind can see," she mused, her voice growing softer as she reflected on the wisdom of those words. "I think I finally understand what she meant." Just then, a nurse appeared at the doorway, her voice gentle but firm. "Visiting hours are over." Jane stood slowly, reluctant to leave. "Thank you for letting me stay," she said, her voice filled with genuine appreciation. She gave the man's hand one last squeeze before carefully setting it back on the bed, the connection between them lingering in the air. As she walked out of the hospital, Jane felt a strange sense of peace. Though her day had been filled with unexpected turns, she knew one thing for certain: this was the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one where she would find purpose in helping others, just as she had today. Jane turned back to the man, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. "I'll come back tomorrow," she promised softly. "Hang in there, I believe in you." As she walked out of the room, she glanced over her shoulder one last time. "See you tomorrow," she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with quiet determination. In the hallway, a wave of mixed emotions washed over her: anxiety, sadness, but also a newfound sense of purpose. The nurse, noticing her expression, approached with a kind smile. "How is he?" she asked gently. "No change yet, but he'll get better," Jane replied with a determined nod. "Your faith can do more than you think," the nurse encouraged. "Come back tomorrow if you can. Patients need someone to talk to, even if they can't respond." Jane nodded, her resolve strengthening. "I will. Thank you for everything." As she left the hospital, a sense of peace settled over her. Despite the upheaval in her life, she knew deep down that she had done the right thing. That knowledge gave her the strength she needed to face whatever came next. The following morning, Jane returned to her old office to collect her things, her heart heavy with the finality of it all. "How are you holding up?" Lucy asked as soon as she saw her. "I've been better," Jane replied with a weak smile. "Just here to get my stuff." Lucy's eyes filled with sympathy. "I'm so sorry, Jane. Mr. Morgan was too harsh. Maybe I could." "No, it's okay," Lucy. Jane interrupted gently. "Just take care of my plant, all right?" As she packed up her belongings, Jane took a final look around her workspace. So many memories and so much effort poured into this job, and now it was over. She took a deep breath, then walked out of the office for the last time, heading to the nearest cafe with Wi-Fi to start her job search. Hour after hour, Jane sent out resumes, each rejection hitting her like a blow. "Your experience doesn't match our needs. No current vacancies. We've decided to proceed with other candidates." The responses were disheartening, but she refused to give up. By evening, Jane was exhausted, her eyes bleary from staring at her screen. A glance at the calendar reminded her that rent was due in just 3 weeks. "All right, time to take action," she whispered to herself, summoning every ounce of determination. "You can do this." She dove back into the job sites, meticulously crafting cover letters, pouring her energy and hope into each one. "Dear Sir, Madam, I'm confident my experience and skills." She paused, shaking her head. "No, that's too formal. Let's try again." With each attempt, Jane refined her approach, determined to find a new path, a new beginning. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that she had the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Every morning, Jane dragged herself out of bed at 6, fighting the overwhelming urge to stay under the covers. "Rise and shine, sleepyhead," she whispered to her reflection in the mirror, trying to muster some positivity. New day, new opportunities. After a quick breakfast, she sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through job ads on her phone, her eyes scanning each listing with a mix of determination and weariness. "This one looks promising," she muttered to herself. "Administrative assistant at a marketing firm. I can handle that." Without hesitation, she dialed the number listed in the ad. "Good morning," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm calling about the administrative assistant position." "Yes, of course," came the response. "Can you come in today at 2 for an interview?" Jane's heart leaped with hope. "I'll be there. Thank you so much." As the clock struck 2, Jane found herself sitting in the reception area of the marketing firm, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The minutes dragged by, her nerves growing with each tick of the clock, until finally her name was called. "Miss Carter, I'm Carol Stevens, HR Director. Please have a seat." Jane smiled, though her heart was racing, and took a deep breath before launching into her pitch. She spoke with enthusiasm about her experience, her skills, and her eagerness to contribute. Carol listened attentively, nodding as Jane spoke. "You've got an impressive background, Miss Carter," she said finally. "But we're looking for someone with direct marketing experience." Jane felt the spark of hope flickering. She couldn't let this slip away. "I understand," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "But I'm a quick learner. Give me a chance and I promise I'll prove my worth. I'll work extra hours and study marketing in my free time. I'm committed to making this work." Carol's expression softened, but she shook her head. "I appreciate your determination, Miss Carter. You seem very motivated, but we just can't train someone right now. We need someone who can hit the ground running. We'll keep your resume on file, though." The words felt like a punch to the gut, but Jane managed a polite smile. "Thank you for your time," she said, rising from the chair with as much grace as she could muster. As she left the office, the hope that had carried her through the day felt thinner, more fragile. But even as disappointment settled in, Jane knew she couldn't give up. Tomorrow was another day, another chance, and she would keep pushing forward until something finally clicked. Leaving the office, Jane leaned against the cold brick wall outside, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. She clenched her fists, trying to keep the rising wave of frustration at bay. "You can't give up," she whispered fiercely to herself. "This is just the first interview." But the day didn't get any easier. There were 2 more interviews, each one ending the same way: polite smiles, regretful shakes of the head, and the familiar refrain of "we'll keep your resume on file." By the time she left the last office, Jane felt emotionally drained, the rejections weighing heavily on her. Still, despite the disappointments, Jane refused to let herself forget her promise to visit the hospital. The moment she stepped into room 305, she felt some of the day's tension begin to melt away. "Hi," she greeted softly, moving to sit by the bed. The man's face remained as still and pale as ever, but just being there brought her a strange sense of comfort. "I had 3 interviews today, no luck yet, but I'm not giving up." She reached out, taking the man's hand in hers, feeling a quiet strength in the simple contact. "One of the hiring managers said I seemed very motivated. That's something, right? Maybe next time will be different." For a moment, she just sat there, studying his face, searching for any sign that he might hear her. "Sometimes I think I'm just talking to myself," she admitted with a small, sad smile. "But then I remember you might hear me, and I believe you'll get better. We're both fighting our battles, but we'll get through this." Jane spent the next hour talking quietly about her job search struggles, the small victories she clung to, and the uncertainty that hung over her like a shadow. Surprisingly, talking to the unconscious man was more comforting than she had expected. "Your visits help me stay positive," she confessed. "When I'm here, I remember why I started all this: to help someone. It gives me the strength to keep going, to keep job hunting." As she left the room, Jane bumped into the familiar nurse she had come to know over the past few days. "Hi, Jane," the nurse greeted her with a warm smile. "How are you holding up today?" Jane offered a tired smile in return. "It's been tough: 3 interviews, 3 rejections, but I'm trying not to get discouraged." The nurse's expression softened with sympathy. "Jane, I see you here every day, despite everything you're going through. You're an amazing person. Don't lose hope." "Thank you," Jane replied, her spirits lifting just a little. "I'll keep doing my best." That night, back in her small apartment, Jane sat at the kitchen table, counting out the last of her money. "Okay, let's see," she murmured, mentally calculating her expenses. "If I cut back, I might make it another 15 days. But she quickly shook her head, refusing to dwell on the bleak reality. Something has to go right. It has to. Determined not to give in to despair, Jane opened her laptop and threw herself back into the job search, crafting new resumes, refining cover letters, and sending out applications well into the night. "Maybe this one fits," she thought as she typed. "Assistant at a publishing house sounds interesting. I'll send my resume now." It was well past midnight when Jane finally shut down her laptop and crawled into bed. Lying in the dark, Her mind raced with thoughts of the day, the man in the hospital, and the uncertainty of her future. "Please," she whispered into the darkness, unsure who or what she was appealing to. "Let tomorrow be better. Let something go right." Days passed, and despite Jane's relentless efforts, the situation didn't improve. Each day brought more rejection emails, and with each one, her hope dimmed just a little more. One night, sitting at her kitchen table, Jane counted her dwindling savings once again. The numbers confirmed what she had been dreading. There was no way to avoid the inevitable. "So this is it," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her realization. Tears threatened to spill over, but she held them back. "I can't stay here." With a heavy heart, she picked up the phone and dialed her landlord's number. The familiar sound of the ringing phone filled the silence until Mr. Green answered. "Hello, Mr. Green. This is Jane Carter." "Miss Carter, what can I do for you?" His voice was friendly, as always. Jane took a deep, steadying breath. "Mr. Green, I can't make next month's rent. I'm going to have to move out." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Miss Carter, are you sure? Maybe we can work something out," he offered kindly. Jane shook her head, even though he couldn't see her. "No, Mr. Green. I lost my job and haven't been able to find another. I have no choice. I need to move back with my parents." "I'm sorry to hear that, Mr. Green replied, his voice sincere. "You've been a great tenant." "Thank you," Jane said softly, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Could you prepare the paperwork? I'll be out in a week." After the call ended, Jane sat in silence for a long time, staring at nothing in particular. The reality of her situation slowly settled in. Her dream of making it in Chicago was crumbling before her eyes. The next day, Jane made her usual visit to the hospital. As she walked into room 305, a lump formed in her throat. This visit felt different, heavier. "Hi," she greeted, sitting down by the bed like she had done so many times before. "I'm here again, but today I came to say goodbye." She reached out and took the man's hand, as she had done every day for the past few weeks. "I had so much hope that I'd find a job and be able to stay in Chicago, but it didn't work out. I don't even have enough money to survive a couple more months while job hunting. I have to leave and go back to my hometown." Her voice wavered as she spoke, the weight of her words pressing down on her chest. This small room had become a place of solace for her, a place where she could find some sense of purpose and connection. Now, even that was slipping away. Jane paused, her voice trembling as she fought to keep her emotions in check. "I'll miss you, you know. It's strange, isn't it? We didn't know each other, but these visits have become such a big part of my life. You helped me not give up, even when everything felt hopeless." She gently squeezed his hand, a small but heartfelt gesture. "I believe you'll get better. You'll be okay. Maybe one day you'll wake up and tell the nurses about the strange girl who visited you every day. I hope when that day comes, you'll remember me with a smile." Standing up, Jane felt tears slipping down her cheeks, blurring her vision. "Goodbye, and thank you for everything," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. With one last lingering glance at his still face, she quietly left the room, closing the door behind her. Unbeknownst to her, the man's hand twitched slightly, as if in response to her words. Jane spent her final week in Chicago packing up her belongings. Every item she boxed carried a memory, a piece of the life she had built here. "Remember when you bought this mug?" she murmured to herself, carefully wrapping it in newspaper. "It was your first day at work. You were so full of hope." She found an old photo of herself with her colleagues from an office party. "I wonder how they're all doing now. I hope Lucy's okay." With each item she placed in the boxes, books, clothes, mementos. Jane methodically packed away the chapters of her Chicago life, trying not to dwell on what she was leaving behind. The night before her departure, Jane sat on the windowsill, gazing out at the twinkling city lights. "Goodbye, Dream City," she whispered into the quiet night. "Thank you for all the lessons, the highs and lows. Maybe someday I'll return. But for now, it's time to start a new chapter." With those final words, she closed the window and finished her last preparations. The morning of her departure was gray and overcast, as if the city itself was mourning her farewell. Jane took one last look at her now empty apartment, sighed deeply, and began loading the boxes into the rental car. "Well, this is it," she murmured to herself as she closed the trunk. "Goodbye, big city." Just as she was about to get into the car, she heard the sound of footsteps rapidly approaching. Turning around, she was stunned to see a man running toward her, holding a bouquet. Her heart skipped a beat. She recognized him immediately. It was the hospital patient. "Jane," he called out, stopping in front of her, breathless but smiling. "Thank goodness I caught you in time." "You're awake," Jane whispered in disbelief, her eyes wide with shock. "But how did you find me?" The man smiled warmly and handed her the bouquet. "I heard everything you said while I was in a coma, every single word. And when I woke up, my first thought was to find you." Jane accepted the flowers, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know what to say," she stammered, overwhelmed by the moment. "Say you won't leave," he said earnestly, holding out an envelope. "Inside are the papers for a job at the marketing firm I own and the lease for your new apartment. Please stay in Chicago." Jane looked at him, astonishment and disbelief written across her face. She glanced down at the envelope, then back at him. "But why? You don't know me." The man's eyes softened as he replied, "Because you didn't give up on me, even when you had every reason to. You stayed by my side when I had no one. I may not know you well, but I know that you're someone special, someone worth helping, just like you helped me. Chicago needs people like you. And so do I." "Yes, I do," Alex objected softly, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I know you're kind and compassionate. You didn't walk away from a stranger in need. You don't give up, even when things seem hopeless. And I want someone like that by my side." Jane couldn't hold back her emotions any longer. Tears streamed down her face as she threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. "I'm so glad you're okay," she sobbed, her voice choked with relief and gratitude. Alex hugged her back, holding her close as they stood there, oblivious to the curious glances of passers-by. For a moment, the world around them faded, and all that mattered was the connection they had forged through those long, uncertain weeks. After Jane had calmed down, Alex gently suggested, "So how about we go see your new place?" She nodded, still in shock at the whirlwind of events. They walked to a sleek, black sedan parked nearby, and Alex opened the door for her. As they drove through the city, Alex glanced over at her with a smile. "By the way, I didn't get a chance to properly introduce myself. I'm Alex Hastings." "Hastings," Jane repeated, her eyes widening in surprise. "As in Hastings Industries?" Alex nodded. "Exactly. I'm the CEO." Jane was stunned. Hastings Industries was one of the largest tech companies in the country, known for its cutting-edge innovations. She could hardly believe the turn her life had taken. When they arrived at her new apartment, Jane was even more astonished. The luxury suite overlooked Central Park, offering a breathtaking view. Alex showed her around, pointing out the spacious living room, the state-of-the-art kitchen, and a bedroom that was easily the size of her entire old apartment. "This is too much," Jane murmured, overwhelmed. "I can't accept this." "Yes, you can," Alex said gently but firmly. "And you should. Consider it a thank you for saving my life." They sat down in the elegant living room, and Alex began to share more about himself. "You see, Jane, I'm an orphan. I don't have any family to look for me. And my staff, well, I'm often away on long business trips. When I didn't show up, they assumed I was working on a secret project. They managed as best they could, waiting for my return." Jane listened intently, holding her breath. When I woke up and realized how much time had passed, I was shocked. But through it all, my first thought was to find you. You were the only constant in the chaos. Your voice, your story helped me recover. "I'm glad I could help," Jane replied softly, her heart full. "You did so much more than that," Alex said, his tone serious. "And now, I want to offer you a job. I need a personal assistant, someone I can trust completely, someone like you." Jane was speechless, her mind racing. "But I don't have any experience working for such a big company," she protested, uncertainty creeping in. "You'll learn," Alex assured her with a warm smile. "But honesty and compassion are qualities that money can't buy. Those are what I value most." Taking a deep breath, Jane looked into his eyes and made her decision. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Alex urged with a smile, and after a moment, Jane nodded. Yes, she agreed, her voice filled with determination. The following weeks flew by as Jane immersed herself in her new role, working closely with Alex to help him regain control of Hastings Industries. Despite her initial doubts, she learned quickly, mastering the intricacies of the business world on the go. Alex proved to be not only a brilliant businessman, but also a patient and supportive teacher, always taking the time to explain complex concepts and answer her questions. One day, after Jane delivered a successful presentation to a group of investors, Alex looked at her with admiration. "You're doing better than I ever expected," he said, his voice filled with genuine pride. Jane smiled, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. She had come a long way from the uncertainty and fear that had plagued her just weeks earlier. With Alex by her side, she knew she was on a path to something truly extraordinary. Jane blushed at the praise, feeling her cheeks warm. "I have a good teacher," she replied softly, her gaze meeting Alex's. For a moment, their eyes locked, and something unspoken passed between them. Over the following days and weeks, their connection grew deeper. Jane found herself stealing glances at Alex as he worked, admiring the way his profile looked against the backdrop of the city skyline. Alex, too, seemed to be drawn to her in ways that went beyond their professional relationship. He began to touch her arm more often during their conversations, lingering just a little longer each time. One evening, after working late on an important project, they decided to order dinner at the office. The project had been a success, and though they were both tired, there was a sense of satisfaction in the air. They settled onto the couch with their takeout, the atmosphere relaxed and comfortable. As they ate, their conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from work to personal anecdotes. Suddenly, Alex set his plate aside, his expression thoughtful. "You know, Jane," he began, his voice soft, "I never really believed in destiny, but now I think our meeting was meant to be." Jane's heart skipped a beat, her pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I mean that you've changed my life, not just by saving me that day on the street, but by showing me that there's still kindness, selflessness, and genuine goodness in the world. You've become more than just a colleague to me, Jane. You're an important part of my life." Jane held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "Alex," she began, but the words caught in her throat as he leaned in, gently brushing his lips against hers. The kiss was soft, tentative, as if asking a question, and Jane answered without hesitation, her heart swelling with warmth and affection. When they finally pulled apart, Alex's smile was tender. "I've fallen in love with you, Jane Carter, your voice, your kindness, your strength. I want to be with you, not just at work, but in life." Tears of joy welled up in Jane's eyes as she smiled back at him. "I love you too, Alex. You've restored my faith in miracles." They kissed again, this time with a sense of certainty that neither had felt before. They knew that many challenges and trials lay ahead, but now they also knew that together they could face anything. Their lives had been irrevocably changed, and as they held each other close, they felt ready to embrace whatever the future held, side by side. And that concludes our story of Jane and Alex, a journey that began with kindness, perseverance, and an unexpected twist of fate. As we've seen, sometimes the most challenging moments in life can lead to the most beautiful outcomes. So, what have you learned from their story? Is it the power of resilience, the importance of compassion, or the magic of believing in something greater? We'd love to hear from you. Comment below with one lesson you've taken from this story and how you plan to apply it in your own life. If you liked this video, please leave your comment below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to bring you more inspiring content.